Hello guys, so today we are going to talk about one of the most confusing concepts in the Node.js ecosystem, and that is CommonJS versus ES modules. The two are basically the same thing. They are both JavaScript, but the implementation is so different. The biggest of which is how they connect multiple JavaScript files together. You can't require ES modules or import CommonJS modules unless you follow a set of rules which never completely work. The best solution is normally to use a transpiler like Babel or a JavaScript superset like TypeScript. Well, Node.22 is taking the first step to fix this. So let's say we have three files that we want to interact with each other. So we can say we have a utils.js file and maybe a slugify.js file. So inside utils.js, we could export a function that say sums numbers together, right? So you give it an array of numbers and then it sums them up and returns one number. So this function is an ES module. How do you know that? Well, it uses the export keyword to export things outside of the file. CommonJS modules don't have the export keyword. So let's go to the slugify file. So here we have a function called slugify that accepts text and then returns a slugified version of the text. So we are going to treat this as a CommonJS module. So to export something from a CommonJS module, you use the module.exports function. So we do module.exports, the slugify function like that. So you realize both of these files have a JS extension and both of them are JavaScript files, but there is a difference in the implementation of the export functionality. Okay, so let's try to use the files in our index.js file here. So to use the exported sum function in our index.js file here, we could import it, right? So we could do import sum from our utils.js file here and then try to use it. So you can say you have an array of numbers from 1 to 5 and then we can use our sum function to sum those numbers like that. So this looks straightforward, right? Let's try to run it. So we do node index.js and immediately notice that it has failed to run. And you get one of the most rage-inducing warnings here. Syntax error. Cannot use import statements outside of a module. So Node.js has no way of knowing if we're importing an ES module or not. So if we look at the warnings, there is a hint here. To load an ES module, you set type module in the package.json file or you use the .mjs extension. So to get this to work, we need to go to a package.json file and then add the type module to it. So if we do that and try to run the file, we're getting another error, cannot find module. So there's still another rule of ES modules that we have to consider when importing ES modules. You have to use the full file extensions for it to work. So with that, if we try to run it, it will now run. Weird that you have to go through all that just to do a simple thing. And the biggest problem with having to add the type module to your package.json file is that everything is now treated as an ES module. So let's try something else. Let's try to import our slugify function to our index.js file here. So we do an import slugify from a slugify.js file and then we can test it. We can say text is hello world and then we can call our slugify function on that text. So let's try to run it. So node index.js. We have another error. The requested module does not provide an export named default. So we can't import CommonJS modules in a ES module. So what if we tried to require it instead of importing it because it's a CommonJS module? So we could do slugify equals to, we require the slugify.js file like that. Surely that should work now, right? Well, let's try it. So node index.js. Require is not defined in ES module scope. You can use import instead. So we are going through circles trying to do the same thing. So what we've established is that imports and requires cannot interact with each other. And the funny thing is, if you look at other runtimes like Burn, they will run this file without problems. Okay, so let's go back to what Node.22 does, and that is runs this without any problems. Okay, so first, we're just going to try to run it without changing anything. So what is the Node version you're using? You're using Node 20. So let's use Node 22. So this feature is still experimental. So we just can't do the node index.js and it works. It will still throw these horrifying errors. So to use it in Node 22, you have to add the experimental require module flag before you pass the file to it. So like that. So by default, still does not work, but let's look into the errors. So the same similar error, the file is being treated as an ES module because it has a .js extension and contains type module. So that was the big misstep we had to do when Node.js forced us to have to add type module to a package.json. Now everything has to be treated as a module, and you can't have common CommonJS module. So let's remove this, and then so to differentiate between an ES module and a CommonJS module, we can use the file names. So what we do is for the utils.js file, since this is an ES module, instead of giving it a .js extension, we should give it a utils.mjs extension. And for the slugify.js file, so since this is a CommonJS module, we just change it from slugify.js to slugify.cjs. So this is now a CommonJS module. So that way, we also need to change imports here to use the correct extension. So the utils is from an MJS file and Slugify is from a CJS file. Okay, so let's try to run this to see if we experience any problems. So Node.js still refuses to run this file, but now we are getting the syntax error here where we cannot use import statements outside of a module. So this is a .js file. So by default, this is a common.js module. So inside CommonJS modules, you can only require stuff. So importing ES modules will still work, but we need to require them. So we need to change this from an import to a require statement. So it will be sum equals to we require the utils.mjs file. So you remember previously, MJS files can only be imported. But since we're in a CommonJS file here, we need to require it in order for this to work. So let's try it again, and that should successfully run. So it's a lot better than it was before. We are able to import ES modules in CommonJS files, but we still need to stick with the rules. CommonJS files can only use require. They can't use import. It's a little, but still doesn't work the way we expect it to. So the way it was before, where we were just using import statements, it just works by default when you run it in a ban. It doesn't care whether you're using import or require statement. So this is the destination. This is where we are going into. But for now, we have to stick to the rules of CommonJS and ES modules. So what this means is that we were to make our index.js file into an ES module file like that. We could actually switch to using import statements inside the file, and it would still work. So we're importing the ES module and the CommonJS module. So if we run this with our experimental flag, everything will still run. So again, not where we want to be, but this is a great start. So that should be all for this video. I'm really excited about this feature, and I hope you learned something new about it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.